Hello everyone. I hope this message finds you fit and fine. Why Russia declared war on Ukraine? Mr. Putin has given its own reasons and Ukraine and Western Bloc its own. Purpose of this video is not just to understand what is going on, also to understand why things work in this manner in international politics. For this, we need to understand insights coming from international political theory. Take a look over these headlines. Mr. Putin earlier worked as KGB agent. He was posted in Eastern Germany when disintegration of USSR was happening. He never accepted post-Cold War security architecture. It means, he said, Western Bloc has been continuously connecting with Eastern European countries to take them under NATO so that security interests of Russia can be compromised. So it means Russia considered this war as a war which was needed for its legitimate security interests. What does it mean? Let's understand. Take a look over this location. Major economic centers of Russia are based in this area. And look at the capital Moscow. It is also on eastern side of Russia. Traditionally, these Eastern European nations were part of USSR umbrella. And now we have seen areas like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which were once ruled from Moscow, now they are actually part of NATO. It means now US and other NATO members have installed their military equipments in these areas. Now Russia has been saying that if Ukraine became part of NATO, it will mean that now these military establishment of NATO forces will be there. And NATO consider Russia as threat for them. And Russia thinks if they establish their bases here, then they can attack Russia, compromise security and economic strength of Russia at any point of time. And that is why he was saying that maintaining this area as buffer, it means NATO should not install its bases here, is a necessity for Russia. And these are the conditionalities Mr. Putin was talking about. And that is why some scholars are saying that waging war against Ukraine is Russia's geopolitical necessity. Other scholars are saying this war is just misinterpretation, propaganda, miscalculation. Because many times wars are fought between conflicting stories nations have on particular events. Now take a look over this area. In 1991, when USSR was disintegrated, Ukraine became a separate nation. But if you look at the recent statements of Mr. Putin, he says Ukraine was never a full-fledged state. Although Ukraine's territorial boundaries, means territory, is recognized internationally, then why Mr. Putin was making this point? My friends, the reason is when you use the word state, it comes with sovereignty. It means Mr. Putin is saying that Ukraine has been a puppet of Western Bloc, never exercised the concept of sovereignty on which an independent state is based. So that is why he's saying it was never an independent, you can say, state. According to Mr. Putin, he believed in these areas as frontiers. And when it comes to eastern part of Ukraine, this area is actually having Russian ethnic people, and that's why this Luhansk and Donetsk, they became the hub of Russian rebels. We are going to talk about them as well. Why Russia is in state of war as of now. We need to think on these lines. Now, let's think from perspective of different international theories, a new insight. Realism. Realism says that we should look at things the way they are, not how they should be. For example, if you start giving advice to Mr. Putin, you should stop war. You should think of humanity. You should think of peace. You should look at future. Then Mr. Putin would reply to you that I believe in international politics as explained through lens of realism, which says we should not be thinking about what ought to be, kaisa hona chahiye. No, we should think of how things are. If NATO is increasing its influence, extending towards Russian border, then this is what it is. And that's why we should have a counter mechanism on that fact. So, realist thought says that nation's goal is to increase its power, because only power can safeguard your interest. No one will come to give you what is needed for your interest. No one will come, because in international politics, only power gets respect. Nations who are powerful can easily convince other nations to have favorable terms and conditions with them. You can take example what happens with nations who are not having that much geopolitical strength, that much influence. They are never in news. When they come for engaging with other nations, they are not given that much priority. And that is why, my friends, increasing power should be the priority of every nation. This is what realist school of thought says. War are unavoidable. Wars are going to happen no matter what. Why? Because realist school of thought says that at every point of time, nations will have insecurity. Insecurity from neighbor, insecurity from other powers. And for removing these insecurity, they will gain power. And when they will gain power, their adversary will become insecure, their neighbor or their adversary will become insecure. And when this insecurity will increase, what is going to happen? Eventually, war is going to happen. And my friends, realist school says that you should wage war when your enemy is weak. You should not wait for Ukraine to become part of NATO, because if it becomes part of NATO, whole NATO establishment will be standing with Ukraine. And that is why Mr. Putin was saying that if he wait now and Ukraine became part of NATO, then Ukraine can actually take action in Crimea, which was already annexed by Russia, right? And in that war, now Ukraine will not be fighting alone. NATO forces will be with Ukraine. And that is why Putin was saying, from realist perspective, this is the right time to subjugate Ukraine. Best will survive. This is the reality of world. Only best will survive. And less powerful one will be eclipsed. And that is why I was saying, realist says power should be increased, right? Look at China. If you look at the comments which were made in 1979 by Deng Xiaoping, he said, bide your time. China should wait for its chance. Right now, China's focus should be on its economy. And China waited for its time. And in the decades which were later, we saw China increased its economic strength in leaps and bounds. And now what we are observing, China became powerful and now economically powerful, and then it transferred this economic strength into military strength, into geopolitical strength, right? And now we are seeing China establishing itself as expansionary power, right? So this is realist perspective. For them, end goal is to gain power and should always be social, economic and political imperative. You should gain strength in these areas by having more power. And it is very much needful for your self-preservation. Because if you don't have power, then those who have power, they will subjugate you. This is the hard reality, the way international politics work. This is what they are saying. Take example of Afghanistan. We have seen Afghanistan became a land of great game. Once we saw, take a look on 1980s period. We have seen intervention by USSR. Later we saw intervention by USA. We have seen how democracy was quashed by Taliban. So this is what happens if a nation is weak economically, weak militarily, and weak geopolitically. If you are well connected, if you have strong friends, then these strong friends are also a component of your power. The nature of realism implies that seeking a moral high ground, acha banna, moral high ground, is not always the best way to serve your interest. That government cannot always achieve what they want to achieve by being good, by looking good. Realism says in international politics, deceit, violence are highly effective to serve your end. What you want for your nation, you can get it by deceit and violence. And take a look what intelligence agencies do. Intelligence agencies of every nation. They are essential component of their security architecture and their essential component of overall power dynamics they have. When I ask which intelligence agency you count as the most powerful intelligence agency of the world, you name Mossad, Israel, CIA, US, KGB, Russia. Why? Because of the capability, because of the actions, the missions they can perform in different territories of the world. So don't you think it represents their power? You must have read about Operation Wrath of God, which was conducted by Israel. Israel, a small nation which was once having war from all three sides. And it defeated all three Arab nations and established itself as an independent, strong nation. So how it got possible? When realism theory, realism as an approach was used, you have to increase power for self-preservation because no Arab nation was agreeing for the existence of Israel, right? So I hope now you can relate how international politics work from realist perspective. Now there's another perspective, we call it Constructivist Approach. As the name says, whenever you are reading something new, to make it simple, just break the word. It says construct. According to them, the way international politics work is not something natural. If I'm dropping this pen, this is the natural effect. This is happening due to gravity. But international politics will work only in this manner as explained by realist. This is rejected by constructivist. They says this is construction made by us, that war is necessary, that insecurity is necessary, that international politics is just about power politics. These are our constructions. Our behavior, our actions as a nation made this world work in this manner. The moment we change the way we perform, the way we engage with the world will change. International politics will also change. States want security, but security as a concept is not fixed. Because when I say security, what comes to your mind? Oh, territorial security. Our borders should be safe. But do you think that is the only kind of security you need? Now we are living in a world where we have hybrid security threats. We have threat from cyber attack, we have maritime security threat, we have food security issue. Means a nation, a group sitting in any part of the world, they can use biological weapons and they can compromise different kind of security which we need, right? So the point is, now our threat is not just from other nations. So Realism says that you have to maximize your power and war is going to happen. But how you are going to engage in war with some hackers sitting in some different part of the world and they hack our power systems, hack our defense equipments, hack our nuclear establishment? How you are going to wage war against them? So it means if nature of security threat is changing, don't you think our approach to handle those security threats should also alter? And for altering that, it means some threats are such international cooperation is a necessity. You cannot count other nations just as your competitors, as we read in realist school of thought, realism, which I just explained. For some security threats, we have to come together. For example, COVID. Do you think one nation securing vaccines and not giving to other nation, following this vaccine nationalism, can actually secure themselves? No. Because the nature of this virus, the kind of this disease, till everyone is safe, no one is safe. So the beautiful insight I want you to understand, as nature of security threats are changing, now we need more cooperation, right? We need more sharing. Then only we can be secure, right? Security identities, interests and policies constructed through interactions. Means how we perceive these things work, it is based on nations behaving with others. Between states. For example, if you are building weapons and weapons and weapons because you think others can actually compromise your security, then others will say, oh, you are building weapons. Why are you building weapons? It means you are planning to attack us. Then they also start building weapons. So this weapon race is not a natural fact. It is a construction, and construction because the way you are interacting with other states. That is why world is working in this manner. Now we have another idea, liberalism. So now look at liberalism and try to apply. Is it possible to apply in context of Ukraine and Russia dynamics? Liberalism says peace and coexistence is possible. It is possible. For example, liberal institutionalism. Those who think this is a new word, you should know that if liberals are saying that there can be peace, how can there be peace? So liberals say, take a look at your nation. At your nation, one state is not fighting with the other state, means UP is not fighting with Punjab. It's not like UP police is actually sitting on border fighting with Punjab police. ऐसा तो नहीं होता. Why? Because there is a national identity in place. There's a national government in place. National rules are in place that this cannot happen. There's a hierarchy there. And topmost in hierarchy is national government. So it is making sure that law and order is there in India. Liberals say, what if we make same kind of hierarchy at international level? It means there can be a world government. If there is a world government, then this world government will have power on behavior of these nations with each other. And then there can be a peace. This idea seems to be quite new or impractical to most of you because you are born and you are living in a world which is not having this world government. But efforts are made in this direction. Take example of different international institutions. These international institutions are not successful to that manner, but these are steps in that direction. For example, United Nations, although considered a failure for considering these happenings around the world and not able to bring peace there. But you cannot say United Nations has not done anything. Because when you use the word peace, peace is not just about absence of war. Peace is not just about absence of war. Peace comes with a lot of changes which are needed. Means prosperity, rights, development. So United Nations is working in all these areas, right? So that chances of conflict reduces. So this is a step coming from liberal ideas. Negative consequences of war. What are the negative consequences? Liberalism says economic loss happens, destruction to peace, and civilian casualties. In today's globalized society, using economic tactics such as bilateral trade agreements, international diplomacy can be more effective in advancing political interest than threatening force. There's a saying that geoeconomics is coming into front seat and geopolitics and military tactics are going into back seat, because many nations are actually engaging more in trade, building trade pacts, engaging into free trade agreements. So more they became interdependent on each other, less likely that they are going to go on war. This is called complex interdependence. For example, if consider you have a lot of interest, lot of interdependence with your friend. Your friend do a lot of work which are must for you, and you also do a lot of work which is must for your friend. Now, no matter how many conflicts you have in mind, but you won't break, you won't engage into direct war that easy because of dependence theory, right? And when I say dependence, complex interdependence, okay? Because when I say dependency theory, this is another concept, okay? I'm using complex interdependence, right? Now, nation's belief system also shapes its foreign policy. For example, some nations are considered traditionally to be peace-loving nation because their values, cultures have such factors in place. Take example of India. India has not been considered as an expansionary power, interventionist power. And this has a lot to do with historical, cultural and social factors. In India's history, if you look at the geography, we are actually covered by natural barriers. From three sides by sea, and on the northern side you have a strong Himalayan presence, and most of the invasions used to happen from northwestern frontier. And enough resources, and that is why self-sufficiency of India was one reason, considered as one reason that peaceful coexistence has been a prevalent theory in our history, and it was later added in our constitution as well. For example, Article 51, we believe in international law, we believe in peaceful coexistence, we believe in resolving conflict through peaceful measures, right? So foreign policy efforts and behavior are also shaped by these factors, right? Now, constructivists also argue that states are not the most important factors of international relations. There are other factors as well, like I gave you example in case of hacking, right? But that international institutions and other non-state actors are valuable in influencing behavior. For example, nowadays, many multinational companies, when I'm saying non-state actors, it means organizations which are not government, but they influence international relations. Some strong companies, NGOs, civil societies, they actually influence the decision making of various governments, build strong relations between governments, right? Similarly, international organizations like IMF, World Bank, WTO and others, and we all have membership there, chair there, we engage into different dialogues on different areas. So this is also used for building peace, right? Civil society organization, Amnesty International, and you have these international organizations. Now, why Russia is in state of war with Ukraine now? Why now? Number one reason, Ukraine has become the bone of contention between Washington and Moscow. And that is why this fight is not just about Ukraine. This fight is about longer, this picture that Moscow thinking that Washington is going to use Ukraine to threaten Moscow, right? Now, to prove this point, take a look over this map and take a look over these NATO allies. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. In 2004, they joined NATO. And these territories were actually once ruled from Moscow, right? Now, 4,000 NATO troops led by UK, Canada, Germany are stationed in this area. Means at any event of war, they can easily mobilize their forces towards Russia. Now, 34,300 US and Germany troops are present in this area, Mediterranean area. 62,000 US troops are present in Poland. So they have a strong fleet there and as well as ground presence. So now, I hope it is visible here, 1,900 US troops in Romania. So according to Russia, what NATO is doing, NATO is actually encircling Russia. And continuously, by influencing other Eastern European nations, they are bringing this line near to Russian border. And that is why it is said that it is geopolitical interest and economic interest of Russia which may be compromised if these lines continuously come near to Russian border. So if Ukraine became part of NATO, then these forces will be installed here also, and Moscow will be in direct strike range of this NATO establishment. And that is why what he was saying, Russia wants West to keep Ukraine and other former Soviet nations out of NATO. This is the demand. If they are out of NATO, then this border will be, and this area will be neutral. This area will be buffer. Russian borders and roll back forces from Eastern Europe. This is the demand. Okay, I hope now you are clear why Putin is taking such strong measures in Ukraine, right? I hope this point is clear. Now, Putin, meanwhile, has called Ukraine an artificial creation. He says it was created by Western enemies to compromise the security of Russia, because US and Western European nations, throughout their history, they have considered Russia to be an existential threat for them. Now, if Ukraine joins NATO, I told you it is eligible to get support from GUPS members in case of external attacks. So, Crimea was annexed by Russia. So, Russia thinks that if it allows, if this time also passes and Ukraine joins NATO, then in future, Ukraine may take action in Crimea. And if Ukraine take action in Crimea, it will be a strategic defeat, for Russia. Why I'm using the word defeat, the probability of defeat, the reason is now all NATO forces may be used, may be mobilized for the help of Ukraine in this war against Russia. So Russia don't want this war to happen so near to its border, and that is why, so Russia believes Ukraine could attempt to take Crimea and joins NATO. So that is why preemptive strikes become necessary. Okay? The Russian president demanded Ukraine demilitarize and become a neutral state. Become a neutral state and we don't have any problem. Peacemaking and liberation from separatist movement, this was the base on which Russia mobilized some of its forces into this region. You can see Luhansk and Donetsk, right? And within this red region, this represents rebel-held areas. Rebel-held areas means Russian ethnic population. Then they are also supported by some Russia-backed people who have entered into this territory. And the recent statement by Mr. Putin has divided this area. According to him, now we have 3 independent nations here. Means Ukraine and 2 independent republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. Okay? So that threat actually minimized, at least from this area, for Russia. Now, Ukraine is important for its resource richness also. West is also so much interested in Ukraine due to this resource richness. Because if they have good terms with Ukraine, and Ukraine also become part of EU, then market players of EU can access this resource, this variety of resources of Ukraine easily on favorable terms. Okay, and that is why they are so much concerned, because in international politics, interests matter. Okay, because when it comes to turmoil, civil war, they are also happening in different parts of the world. Military coup are happening in different parts of the world. For example, Myanmar and other areas. But why Western powers are not that much interested to bring democracy in there? Because strategic interest, security dynamics, right? These are taken into picture. Now, Ukraine was the most powerful country in Soviet Union after Russia. Ukraine has been a hub of commercial industries, factories, and defense and manufacturing. So, a great potential is there which need to be tapped. Russia is also interested and EU is also interested. Ukraine also provide Russia with access to Black Sea and then Mediterranean Sea, which is important for trade links of Russia. Now, there's another perspective, interesting one, Marxism. So Marxists say that these wars are actually done by elites, elite class. In wealthy states, they wage war to exploit the poorer people. Because ultimately, when war happens, who suffers the most? Poor suffer the most. Who gains the most? Arms lobby, arm manufacturing companies, they gain the most, right? So, and what happened in war? So these rich nations, they want to defeat these areas or control these areas by bringing their army, so that later they can extract resources from their area for their companies on favorable terms. So actually, Marxists say these wars are actually for money. This is the reality behind it. Okay? Marxists believe that property ownership is not the only reason of corruption. It is also a reason of conflict. When I say property ownership, because Marxists believe in communism, and communists believe in common property. So why rich people are investing, rich nations are investing so much in war, that US forces are always on war or supporting war at one point or other point. Why? Because the companies there, they want some turmoils to be there, Marxist says, so that when these areas become weak, now they will need help. These companies will say, we will invest in your area, but we need minimum tax and we need these mines on these throwaway prices. So ultimately, who wins in this war? Who makes the money? These companies make the money. And they also share the revenue with the respective government, obviously. So it means money is the factor. And why they are keep on accumulating more and more money? Because concept of private property is there. They are allowed to accumulate money without any limit. So Marxists say, if we put a limit on this, that you cannot gain private property, then why would they accumulate? And if they don't have any motivation to accumulate, then why would they invest in a destabilizing world? So this is one perspective coming from Marxism. Okay? So what US and NATO nations want? Both Russia and West see Ukraine as potential buffer. Potential buffer. It means it should be a zone which actually reduces the chances of coming into direct conflict. NATO nations can reach close to Russian borders and have their great influence in the region. I told you, they can install their forces in this area and they can directly threaten Moscow and threaten these economic hubs which are present on eastern part. After Crimean annexation of Russia in 2014, not only became strategically important for NATO, also economic, because of resource, I told you, resources of Ukraine. Why does Ukraine matter? So you got the news, right? Now there's another quite interesting statement by Michael Foucault, famous political scholar. So he says, these wars are actually not fought by some sovereign. Sovereign means this state, some few rulers, these are not engaging in war. Nowadays, the kind of war are being fought, the people are actually mobilized, populations are mobilized for the purpose of wholesale slaughter. In the game of this necessity, massacres have become vital. So massacres happen and some stories are flouted that you have to engage in war. It is necessary for existence. And that's how meaningless massacres happen in this world. Now these wars are not just about some armies fighting. No. Now a lot more people are actually compromising their life. Russia's Putin announcing military operation in Ukraine. Ukrainian Interior Ministry confirms that yes, we can see some missiles being launched in Kyiv. So these are some pictures which are going on. Explosions reported near major Ukrainian cities. So it means now Russia is not talking about Donetsk and Luhansk. Now Russia is in favor of engaging and subjugating Ukraine for what Russia says its legitimate security and economic interests. So Russia has said that by land, air and sea, they are in this spatial tactical operation. Now implication, we have seen that UNSC draft resolution asking Russia to unconditionally give up arms and take defense forces back. But with regard to this, India has abstained from this resolution, right? This is a fact, and economic sanctions are leveled against Russia. Mr. Biden has recently said this important Nord Stream pipeline, which comes from Russia to Germany, supplying this natural gas to Germany and other European nations from there. And this is an important economic resource for Russia. So this is in building phase. So now Biden is saying that sanction has been leveled against the company which is building it, so that we can cut the economic, you can say, revenue stream of Russia. Sanctions on Russia, exporters to urge government that it's not just about that sanctions on Russia are going to compromise Russia's interest on also. It is also going to compromise interest of other nations, for example, India and other nations who actually dependent on Russia for crude oil and fertilizer and other imports and defense equipments majorly. What implications does the Russia and Ukraine crisis on India? So first is that we can come under CAATSA. It means sanctions can be imposed against India as well. That's a probability. Less likely though, that's a probability. If because it may be a situation where international powers make India choose one, Russia or Western Bloc. But India has always believed in maintaining strategic autonomy. So strategic autonomy means we are going to continue our engagement with Russia, and then some sanctions can be leveled against us also, right? It can also create inflation issue, as we have seen, due to lack of, or you can say shortage of natural gas in international market. There will be a price rise, and price rise will increase the cost of import for India, and thereby there can be inflation. Apart from this, an important dynamic is Russia and China will become more closer. And you know, we are having adversarial relations with China. Russia has been a traditional ally, but for Russia, China is more strategically important, because when supply of natural gas are being cut in Europe, now China has promised that they are going to increase the import of energy and other imports from Russian side, which is going to be, give due economic, you can say, cushion to Russia in this time. So this partnership is detrimental for India's strategic interest. Among the strong Indian diaspora present there, right? Many students are there. They are also coming back. So that's a threat also. Rising as Chinese aspirations, maritime and border tussle in the region, especially Indian border. If they align together, then they can create maritime security issue for India. Apart from this, I actually posted one status when this dispute started, and when it was clear that Russia may advance towards Ukraine, that if Russia advances towards Ukraine, then China can actually use this as an opportunity to take over Taiwan fully. Although China says Taiwan is integral part of PROC, means China, but we have autonomous government in Taiwan, right? India has relations with Taiwan, but has not given a separate diplomatic status, because if we give a separate ambassador, it means we recognize Taiwan as a separate nation, which may create, you can say, issue with China. but this can be a probability that Xi Jinping may mobilize more forces toward Taiwan to actually fully integrate it, snatch the autonomy which is given to Taiwan. So I hope this issue is a bit clearer to you now, and this PDF will be available in Shashank Tyagi for You Telegram group. I hope you're liking this, understanding the story of international politics, how things work, right? And my message, international relations are not just about events. There's a broad framework which work from behind, and we should understand it. If we understand it, then having grip on international relations will be a cakewalk for you. See you.